Okay, hello everyone. Hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in. If you can give me a quick sound check, you can hear me. If you could write in the comment box that yeah, you can hear me. We will get rolling with this. Okay, actually, you know what? Cancel that. I just did my own sound check. Um, Thank you for tuning in. My name's Andrew, and I am AWI Coaching, and I wanted to bring you this quick little webinar on functional threshold power and some of the pros and cons of using functional threshold power. Um, and quick overview of these little webinars. I just want to be able to bring some advice, offer some guidance, answer some questions on topics that come up in day to day for me as a coach. Sometimes I see things online in chat rooms, or maybe not chat rooms, but Facebook pages, Zwift Facebook pages, that kind of thing, and also things that I deal with as a coach and myself personally, and what I've seen some of the athletes that I struggle with. So, or in other words, this is kind of maybe Andrew's time to rant a little bit about some things that I see, and I just want to clarify things and try to make things simple. There's a lot of information out there nowadays, a lot of blogs, a lot of webinars, a lot of podcasts, and sometimes it can be a bit noisy. So my goal with these Monday nights is to kind of help cut through the noise and just keep things a little bit simple. So quickly about me, I did used to race professionally for a number of years with several professional teams, and I also have a few certifications as well. I'm currently a PMBI level 2 coach, so that's mountain bike instructing, and as well as NCCP certified coach, and I work as a Training Peaks level 2 coach as well. And there's some of my details, and I know you can't see me, so I threw up a quick picture of me from a few years back. Okay, so getting right into it quickly. If you have a question, please type it into the comments. I can see them roll in here. There is a little bit of a delay, so if I don't get to your question right away, that's just the delay. And I might be able to work the question in, and if not, I'll be able to get to it. So one of the reasons for picking FTP is, again, I just see a lot of noise and frustration with FTP, and that's even one of the titles of my of a slide coming up. So I just wanted to give you my take on FTP, or functional threshold power, and how I look at it and how I keep it very simple. So the definition for this, and there's a few varying definitions, but generally it's the maximum power one can sustain in a quasi-steady state for 30 to 70 minutes. So it's not necessarily how much power you can push out for 60 minutes. That's a bit of an original definition that was used primarily when assessing professional athletes who do have long time to exhaustions, but threshold can be down to about 30 minutes in length. So, but in general, how I really think of threshold is when you're below threshold, you're 10% below your threshold power. You can probably hold that for a pretty long time. And with training, you can really extend that out probably towards several hours. So your time to exhaustion below threshold is quite long. As soon as you go above threshold, your time to exhaustion quickly diminishes. And I'll bring it to the next slide shortly. So think about your time above threshold as not so much time, but as energy. And as you go above threshold, it's kind of like having an auxiliary battery pack. And you've charged that battery pack, you've plugged in your hybrid, you've plugged in your Tesla car, and you hit the road, and let's say you're above threshold, eventually the battery pack's going to lose energy, and you're going to actually have to drop back back below functional threshold power to replenish that power. So Think of that, you're driving your Tesla down the road, you got to pull into the service station and let the coal-fired, nuclear-fired, gas-fired power plants recharge your batteries. So that's kind of how to think of it. Ways to determine your functional threshold power. Again, I went through a lot of these in a previous webinar that I posted in the comments here. So there's a ramp test is kind of a good first way to do it, good first introduction, has some limitations. There's a 20-minute protocol, which many people don't do correctly and can lead to an inflated FTP. And then there's a modeled way as well using programs like Golden Cheetah, WKO, Exert, and I'm sure there are other ones out there that take in your whole power duration curve. So I'm going to go through these really quickly. Again, I used these slides previously in a previous webinar. So ramp tests, it's a fixed wattage over a fixed amount of time, and you go until you just can't go anymore. And typically they use 75% of your last 60-second average and equate that to your FTP. Again, this leads to, in my opinion, a lot of overestimation of FTP, of your functional threshold power. 20-minute test, I think, is the next best way to do this. And the proper protocol here is, and I know a lot of people will just use a Zwift race as a 20-minute test. They'll do the 8 laps of Crit City. But what happens there is they're actually using a lot of their anaerobic battery to get to that high at 20-minute number to then calculate their threshold. So it again can lead to a higher than what it's supposed to FTP number. The true protocol for a 20-minute test is that you're actually supposed to do a 5-minute really hard effort just before doing the 20-minute test to quote unquote burn off the anaerobic energy so that you can really use that 95% metric. So again, these are slides I went into more detail previously. This is probably the best way to go about this because you can start to use some of that race data, some of that Zwift data, is you're using power duration across the whole timeline and your whole power duration curve to come up with a modeled threshold power. And with good data, this tends to be the most accurate way to determine your threshold power. And normally, second, sorry, and um, and the reason why we want to do that is everybody has their unique physiology, and threshold power doesn't look into your physiology. It doesn't know what is limiting you from pushing more power at threshold. All it's doing is boiling down and figuring out that line when you go above or you go below, whether you can go for a very long time or a very short period of time. But there are several limiters that could influence an athlete's unique FTP, and that's aerobic capacity, just how aerobically fit is that athlete? Fatigue resistance. An athlete might not be able to give it their all for 40 minutes, 60 minutes, 50 minutes. Nutrition can play a role in FTP, especially if you go through a big nutrition change. If you are trying one of the new trendy diets or keto, something like that, I won't go into that. That will influence your FTP in the short term. Muscular endurance, cardiac output, respiratory, intermuscular coordination, those are all limiters that going into a Zwift or a Trainer Road and jumping on and doing their ramp test or even a 20-minute test, it doesn't know, and I don't know either as a coach when I first see if I only see a 20-minute test, I don't even know what the limiter is. I usually have to go a little bit deeper, and sometimes it can be in the comments, sometimes it can be in the heart rate data, sometimes it can be the last point there, intermuscular coordination, how well you're pedaling. So that can be going into pedaling metrics to look at those. So, and again, if you're just joining, a few more people have joined. If you have any questions, just feel free to shoot a question into the comment box and I'll answer the best I can. So this is a great way visually to picture what I've just been speaking about for the past few minutes about threshold power. I use this from Exert because I think it illustrates this fairly clearly. So the red solid line, it used to be dotted line, but I made it solid. That's your threshold power, or that's, my model threshold power. And this was a Zwift race that I did not too long ago. And you can see where I put those black arrows. And those are essentially surges above threshold. So again, every time I go above threshold, I'm digging into that auxiliary battery pack. And it's limited. It only has so much energy. So that's where the blue line at the top comes in. You can see where it's pretty level with the blue dotted line, and then it starts to trend downwards towards the end of the effort, and I have that another black arrow trending downwards. So every time an athlete goes above their threshold, that battery, that max power available, as Exert calls it, starts to come down. And how big that battery pack is a big determinant of an athlete's ability, and we'll get to that in a little bit too. And so, great way to illustrate. And towards the end of the race, probably sprint finish, you can see where that battery pack depleted and actually met into the power that I was pushing, and then you're done. You're pretty much cooked, and you have to drop below threshold to recover again. Probably eat something, collect your thoughts, and carry on. So a great way just to visualize that. Let's say that the red current power number was below that threshold power, that solid red line, that flat solid red line, would be my MPA may not draw down. It would draw down at the long end, but I could typically ride there, or an athlete could ride there for a long time before exhausting. So again, just trying to keep this as simple as possible. That's functional threshold power. Below that, you're fairly comfortable, your breathing's under control, you're feeling good, it's hard work, but sustainable. Above functional threshold power, things are going sideways. Breathing rate's going up, you feel like, more burning in the legs, it just doesn't feel as sustainable. So let's just kind of keep it simple like that. So getting into my daily rant, my Monday rant of FTP is FTP the best measurement of cycling ability? And my answer is not really, and it is just one piece of the puzzle. I was going to put a big no in bold and highlight it and exclamation mark, but it is important. But it isn't the best measurement of cycling ability. It's just one piece of it. So there are several other KPIs, as we call them, key performance indicators of an athlete's ability beyond functional threshold power. Two athletes can have the same functional threshold power, they can weigh the same, they can have the same tactical knowledge, they can have the same nutrition plan. There's so many different things that can be the same, but the outcome of a race, or a workout for that matter, is very different. There's a high degree of variability because there are many other of these key performance indicators that go into, performance on a bike or performance in a workout. So one of the big ones, if you were to ask me what's the biggest measurement of cycling ability or performance, cycling performance, I would say fatigue resistance. And picture that as being able to, you take two people, I always try to do the contrast, take two people, same FTP, same everything. Let's say they even have the same 2-minute power, 5-minute power, identical power profiles, same weight, all those things. But one athlete can repeat all of those, or at least let's say really closely. They can go out and ride for 4 hours. They can just go do an endurance ride. It doesn't have to be hard. And they can repeat all of those powers. They can hit their 1-minute power, 2-minute, 5-minute, 20-minute power. That person is very fatigue resistant. Rider A, or let's say rider B, can't do that. After an hour, they're no longer able to repeat those max powers, or let's say within a few percent of them. So that athlete isn't as fatigue resistant, and that's a big performance indicator, and especially for road racers or racers who are longer duration racers. Mountain bikers, it's still very important. You still have to be able to go fast at the end of the race. But think about the best example is thinking about being in a road race, all race, and then you have to sprint at the end. You have to be very fatigue resistant. Power at VO2 max. You've probably heard of VO2 max. That's another big variable. Two athletes can have the same FTP, but one athlete, let's just say 250 watts, and they weigh the same, all things being equal. The other athlete's power at VO2 max could be well into the mid 300s, whereas another rider's could be maxed out at about 300. So, and there's ways to work on that, but that's something that can also play into raceability and race performance. And I clump these last three all together. They kind of mean different things, and I'm just trying to keep things really simple. But FRC is functional reserve capacity. That's a WKO metric. MPA is an exert metric, max power available, or glycolytic capacity. You've probably just heard some of these terms, but really it's that energy available above threshold. And again, thinking of it as that battery that could and will draw down when you go above threshold. And again, that can be very different depending on the athlete. Two athletes, same threshold, and one will have more of that, a bigger anaerobic battery, so to speak. So let me go back to that. So going back to here is one way to keep that blue line from coming down as quickly. That's that max power available in exert, is to have a bigger battery pack, to have more high energy available, and that line won't come down as much. Or yes, we can raise threshold, but we're not really kind of getting into to training too nuanced. I'm just trying to keep this really simple. Okay, so strategies to increase FTP, and this isn't an exhausted list. I just gathered up a couple of the physiological adaptations that we're going that will go into helping you increase your FTP, because that is a key performance indicator. It is important. If you have a much higher threshold than the person next to you on the start line, chances are you can outperform them. But when we start to get close in FTP number, then there are other things that we need to look at. It's not just FTP. It's not just functional threshold power. So one of the best ways to increase that is progressive volume, building up hours on the bike at a low to moderate intensity. So just going out long rides, 4-hour rides, doing some tempo, doing maybe some low RPM tempo to work on your muscular endurance, your aerobic endurance, working on fat oxidation, becoming better. I use this term simply again, but becoming better using fat as fuel, mitochondrial density, and that's going to help drive that FTP increase from below. And trust me when I say this, you can increase FTP by just lots of zone 2 work. At a certain point, you will plateau, and at a certain point, you might run out of time, but you can increase your functional threshold power without not even really going too close to it, and without doing a lot of sub-threshold or tempo or sweet spot work. You can actually do it with just a lot of really good, high-quality volume. And you're also getting a lot of the other benefits, muscular endurance, stamina, all those things from going long. And then when you do training above FTP, you can also help raise it. You help create some room for it to grow. And a lot of that is training your respiratory system, making sure that the muscles that are driving your breath in and out are well trained so that they aren't taking excess oxygen just to work those muscles. If they're well trained, that saves more oxygen for your legs to work. So again, that's a great thing of VO2 max workouts. If you're breathing hard, you're breathing quickly, that helps. You're also trying to maximize your cardiac output, and beyond stroke volume, beyond how much your heart can beat, you are going to work on that max heart rate and making sure that your heart is delivering the oxygen to the working muscle, and also maximizing your glycolytic capacity or your anaerobic capacity. There's a lot of different terms in there. I'm just trying to kind of keep it simple. So, and this is kind of, again, the point of this whole webinar is I find a lot of people get frustrated with FTP. And I think it's because we try to look at it maybe that it's trying to tell us too much, or maybe we think it's trying to tell us too much, but again, it is pretty simple when you get down into the nuts and bolts of it. So my advice is to separate your identity as an athlete from your FTP number. Use it as guidance, use it to set your training zones, that's fine. But be very cautious of comparing your buddy's functional threshold power, even if you use weight per kilo or pound, watts per kilo, sorry. Your FTP is really your number, and it's what you should use to train. And be realistic and honest with your FTP number. So if you believe, and I rant about this a lot, if you believe that your FTP could be a little bit high, it probably is. And to conduct a confirmation test. So if you think that your functional threshold power is 250 and that you can do that for 60 minutes, then you should try to do that. And even if it's not 60 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, see how close you can get to actually doing a ramp test and getting a number to actually going out and doing that in real life. And also workouts. So if you're doing a sub threshold workout or a sweet spot workout, but your heart rate is immediately above your heart rate threshold. I know we're not talking about heart rate threshold. That might be telling you something as well. So always keep that in mind. And if you have to lower your FTP a little bit, base your zones on that. That's always better than overshooting. Overshooting that. So if you plateaued, if your FTP is just not moving up, then look to your VO2 max and look to make sure that there's some room there. If your threshold power is getting close, if it's within 10%, that's very close, but if it's in 10% of your VO2 max power, let's say your 5-minute power, for argument's sake, it's time to actually go and work on that VO2 max power and try to optimize that, because your FTP won't move any higher than your VO2 max, so your 5-minute power, let's say. And also going and looking at some other limiters and low-hanging fruit. What if you go out and do a 60-minute time trial? What's giving out first? Think about that. Think about, am I getting tired? Am I getting leg cramps? Am I, losing mental focus? And start to pick away at those other limiters, which may not be helping to raise your FTP. And indoor versus outdoor. They're not always the same. It's pretty common that people, athletes, cyclists, find that their FTP number is too high when they come inside. And there's several reasons for that. Part of it's just creating power inside on a stationary trainer is a bit more awkward. So again, kind of going back to point 2, adjust. And if you have to lower your FTP a little bit inside and base your zones for indoors, that's okay, because you are trying to keep it apples to apples as much as possible. It also goes to the point where if you're testing outside and you're testing up climbs and you're out of the saddle and using a lot of anaerobic bursts, and then you go inside and just try TT without really any of those other stimuli, the numbers are going to be different. So keep that in mind. Also, if you jump inside and you use your outdoor FTP with a lot of anaerobic influence to it, if you jump on indoors and then you set all your FTPs and your training zones, and then you immediately jump into erg mode. So erg mode is when you're in a smart trainer and the trainer is in control of your power, so all you're doing is pedaling. You might find that difficult. So keep that in mind. And again, if you can't complete a workout, and that's constant, if you're constantly not being able to complete a prescribed workout, a Zwift workout, trainer road workout, it's likely not you. It's likely that your FTP is set too high. So again, be honest, be realistic. That's the best advice I can give to you for any of that FTP frustration, as I call it, as I've seen. So awesome. That was my goal, to keep this really quick. And there's a little bit of a delay, but do you have any questions? And I'll give it a second here to flip over. And if there are any questions, you can type those in and I will answer to the best of my abilities. And if there's not, thank you for tuning in, and I'll probably wish you all a pleasant evening. And I hope to be back next Monday with something else to chat about, something else to possibly rant a little bit about. Yeah, thank you for watching. I wish this delay was shorter. Okay, here we go. If you're still with me, bear with me.